Good day. We'll call the meeting to order. On the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, meeting number 138, pursuant to Standing Order 1083H4, briefing on security and intelligent threats to elections task force. And today we have with us the Honorable Karina Gould, Minister of Democratic Institutions, for the first hour. In the second hour, we're going to have Andre Boucher, Assistant Deputy Minister, Operations, Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, Dan Rogers, Deputy Chief, SIG-INT, Privy Council Office, Alan Sutherland, Assistant Secretary to Cabinet, Machinery of Government and Democratic Institutions, and Aisha Millett, Senior Policy Analyst, Democratic Institutions. First off, we'll start off with Minister Gould. Go ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the invitation to address the committee today. It is my pleasure to appear and to tell you more about the government's plan to safeguard the 2019 election. I am pleased to be joined by officials today to speak to the technical aspects of Canada's plan. As you mentioned, Mr. Chair, this includes Alan Sutherland, Assistant Secretary to Cabinet, Machinery of Government and Democratic Institutions, Daniel Rogers, Deputy Chief of Signet with the Communications Security Establishment, Andre Boucher, the Assistant Deputy Minister of Operations for the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, and Aisha Millett, Senior Advisor with the Democratic Institution Secretariat of PCO. Avant de commencer, je voudrais exprimer ma gratitude envers les membres du comité pour leur contribution au cours de la dernière année à l'étude de la désinformation. Les témoins et les membres du comité ont fourni de l'information et des points de vue précieux à mesure que nous poursuivions nos efforts pour protéger les élections.
As we continue our efforts to safeguard the 2019 election, elections are an opportunity for Canadians to be heard, for them to express concerns and opinions through one of the most fundamental rights, the right to vote. However, this election will also experience an unprecedented amount of security.
Past few years, democracies around the world have entered a new era, an era of heightened threat and heightened vigilance. 2019 will see a number of countries brace for volleys of attempted disruption. India, Australia, Ukraine, Switzerland, Belgium, the EU, and of course, Canada. Evidence has confirmed that the most recent Canadian general election in 2015 was unencumbered by interference, although there were some relatively primitive attempts to disrupt, misinform, and divide. These efforts were few in number, uncoordinated, and had no visible impact on the voter, either online or inline. La prochaine élection pourrait être bien.
This election may be different. We've seen that the tools that were used to strengthen civic engagement are being used to undermine, disrupt, and destabilize democracy. We expect that some so-called hacktivist groups will use their cyber capabilities to try to influence our democratic process. We could also face coordinated attempts at interference by foreign state actors, similar to what we have seen in other democracies over the last few years. These include attempts to influence candidates or to manipulate social media to spread false or misleading information.
We have witnessed foreign actors looking to undermine democratic societies and institutions, electoral processes, sovereignty, and security. The malicious, multifaceted, and ever-evolving tactics constitute a serious strategic threat. We must be prepared for this. That is why in 2017, I asked Canada's Communications Security Establishment to analyze and make public an assessment of the current risk of cyber threats and possible hacking of Canada's democratic processes. The titled report, Cyber Threats to Canada's Democratic Process, was published as the world's first publicly shared threat assessment of its kind. It identified how key aspects of the democratic process, such as elections, political parties, politicians, and media, are vulnerable to cyber threat activity and influence operations. Cette évaluation et la surveillance
This assessment, along with ongoing Canadian intelligence and the experiences of allies and like-minded jurisdictions around the world, have informed and guided our efforts over the past year and led to the development of a plan of action based on 4 pillars. We recognize that protecting Canada's democratic institutions requires a whole-of-society approach. Therefore, in addition to reinforcing and protecting government infrastructure, systems, and practices, we are also focusing heavily on preparing Canadians and working with digital platforms that have an important role in fostering positive democratic debate and dialogue.
are enhancing citizen preparedness, improving organizational readiness, combating foreign interference, and expecting social media platforms to act. I'd like to take a few minutes to highlight some of the most significant initiatives of our plan. Under the first pillar, enhancing citizen preparedness, we announced the Digital Citizen Initiative. Our commitment includes an investment of $7 million towards improving the resilience of Canadians against online disinformation. We will leverage the expertise of civil society organizations who are directly working in communities on this issue. We are increasing the reach and focus of the Get Cyber Safe National Public Awareness Campaign to educate Canadians about cybersecurity and the simple steps they can take to protect themselves online. We have established the Critical Election Incident Public Protocol. This is a simple, clear, and impartial process for informing Canadians if serious incidents threaten the integrity of the 2019 general election. The Critical Election Incident Public Protocol panel is made up of 5 senior officials. It is expected to come to a decision jointly based on consensus. Il est important de souligner que c'est la raison.
It's important to point out that this is the reason for a panel of 5 senior officials. It will not be one person deciding what Canadians should know. The protocol will be initiated only to respond to incidents that occur within the writ period and that do not fall within Elections Canada's area of responsibility. The threshold for informing the public will be very high and limited to addressing exceptional circumstances that could impair our ability to have a free and fair election. As such, the threshold must extend beyond the normal negative rhetoric that is sometimes associated with political campaigns. I am thankful that, in consulting with political parties on the development of this protocol, partisanship has been put aside in the interest of fairness. Incorporating input from all parties has allowed for a fair process that Canadians can trust.
Pillar, improving organizational readiness. Our national security and intelligence agencies are supporting Elections Canada by providing advice and guidance to improve their preparedness in the face of any potential interference in the administration of elections. The CSE is also offering ongoing cybersecurity technical advice and guidance to political parties. The security agencies will offer threat briefings to key leadership and political parties, and security clearances are being arranged for senior members in each party to give them access to the right information to help them to strengthen internal security practices and behaviors. Dans le cadre du troisième pilier,
under the 3rd pillar, combating foreign interference, the government has established the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force, or SITE, to improve awareness of foreign threats and support assessment and response. The team brings together CSE, CSIS, the RCMP with Global Affairs Canada in order to ensure a comprehensive understanding of and response to any threats to Canada's democratic process. Let me take a moment here to explain how the Critical Election Incident Public Protocol and the SITE Task Force are distinct yet related elements of our approach. SITE ensures that the work of Canada's national security agencies is being done in a coordinated manner that aligns with the respective legal mandates of the agencies. Each of these agencies have their own practices for briefing their international organizational structures, including the heads of those agencies, as part of their regular operational practices. The protocol will not change this.
Relevant information with the panel of senior public service officials who will decide if incidents meet the threshold of interfering with Canada's ability to have a free and fair election. Where National Security Agency heads believe that some incident or incidents could potentially pose a threat to the integrity of Canada's upcoming federal election, they will coordinate with the National Security and Intelligence Advisor to brief the panel accordingly, either through regular briefings or on an ad hoc basis as is required. We have activated the G7 Rapid Response Mechanism announced at the Charlevoix G7 Leaders Summit to strengthen coordination among our G7 allies and ensure there is international collaboration and coordination in responding to foreign threats to democracy. The fourth pillar is with respect to social media platforms. I don't have to tell this committee, but the face of mass media has turned from Gutenberg to Zuckerberg in a generation. It is a transformation whose impact on society is impossible to overstate. Social media and online platforms are the new arbiters of information and therefore have a responsibility to manage their communities. We know that they have also been manipulated to spread disinformation, create confusion, and exploit societal tensions. And the platforms have acknowledged the risk posed by mis- and disinformation. I have been meeting with social media and digital platforms to secure action to increase transparency, improve authenticity, and ensure greater transparency on their platforms. Social media companies have reacted to the incidents of 2016 with some enhancements to their platforms. As a starting point, our government expects that those enhancements be made available to users in Canada as they have been made available to users in the US and Europe. Ce plan global est également
This comprehensive plan is also bolstered by recent legislative efforts. Bill C-76, which received royal assent on December 13, 2018, takes important steps to counter foreign interference and the threats posed by emerging technologies.
Prohibiting foreign entities from spending any money to influence elections, where previously they were able to spend up to $500 unregulated. Requiring organizations selling advertising space to not knowingly accept elections advertisements from foreign entities. Ajouter une interdiction en ligne avec
Adding a prohibition regarding the unauthorized use of computers when there is intent to obstruct, interrupt, or interfere with the lawful use of computer data during an election period. Requirement for online platforms to disclose the identity of advertisers by maintaining a publicly accessible registry of political ads published on the platform during the pre-election and the election period.
That Canada has a robust and highly respected elections administration body in Elections Canada. Coupled with the legislative, policy, and programmatic efforts I have detailed for you today, Canada is in the best possible position to counter efforts to interfere in our democratic processes. While it is impossible to fully predict what kinds of threats, if any, we will see in the run-up to Canada's general election, I want to assure this committee that Canada has put in place a solid plan. We continue to test and probe our readiness, and we will continue to take whatever steps we can towards ensuring a secure, free, and fair election in 2019. Je vous remercie, and I now welcome you.
Thank you very much. I welcome your questions.
Off for the first 7-minute round to Ms. Vanderbilt.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Minister, for being here today, and also for the incredible amount of work that you've put into this, making Canada, I do believe, one of the first countries in the world to have these kinds of protocols. Recently, the All-Party Democracy Caucus heard from Chris Walker, who has written on sharp power. This is power that some authoritarian regimes use in order to distinguish from soft power because it is subversive and it's intended to change public opinion or divide public opinion in other countries. And This is something that when you mention the foreign threats, I think we're not unique. This is happening in countries around the world. So you mentioned the G7 rapid response mechanism. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that, but also the other ways in which Canada is collaborating with other democratic countries around the world to be able to combat this threat.
Thank you very much. And that's interesting, this concept of sharp power. I hadn't heard that before, so I will look into that after this. If you have any information, please don't hesitate to send it. So, with regards to our work in the G7, we are leading the Rapid Response Mechanism, which is a secretariat that will be hosted at Global Affairs Canada that's looking at open source data to establish first of all, a baseline when it comes to how social media is being manipulated with regards to foreign interference on specific domestic activities, although this could also be with regards to, for example, elements of Canada's foreign policy that create spikes. So when we engaged with the White Helmets in Syria, for example, there was evidence of interference from foreign actors that were trying to polarize the debate or spread misinformation in that regard. This is also in line with our work as a member of NATO. NATO has the Strategic Communications Center, which is actively looking at these items. Canada hosted NATO StratCom in the fall and provided an opportunity for our media partners to engage with them and to learn about some of the foreign interference activities that have taken place. NATO does this in all of their member communities and it's open countries, and it's open to the media to participate should they be interested. We're also a member of the Five Eyes. And as such, we share information with regards to foreign threats and interference into our democracies. This is something that, as Western democracies and like-minded countries, we talk about quite a lot. And I personally have had conversations with counterparts in, France, the UK, Germany, Ukraine, Latvia, Australia, the list goes on and on and on, because this is something that all of us are taking very seriously. And we've seen time and time again different instances where there has been evidence of foreign interference in the elections of like-minded countries and allies. That being said, we're still assessing the impact of that interference.
Thank you. Our committee has heard a lot of testimony, as you know, about the ways in which data aggregators have influenced social media platforms, specifically in Brexit, but also in the U.S. election. I noticed that the Critical Election Incident Public Protocol that you've put in place, what would have been the impact in those countries or some of the others you mentioned, Ukraine, India, if something like that had been in place? What do you see? I know it's hard to say a hypothetical, but in what ways could that have mitigated some of the things that we saw happen?
Well, actually, I think that we can point to a very real situation that's not a hypothetical, in that we looked at allied countries and like-minded countries around the world to see what mechanisms they had and have in place. What stuck out for me was the French example of the Conseil d'État that weighed in when there was the leak from the Macron campaign to basically say this is, a threat against our democracy, and they advised the media not to report on it. That's a step further than what this is anticipating. We tried to come up with something that would fit within the Canadian context. The Conseil d'État in France has been around for a very long time. But the idea was to avoid the kind of bureaucratic gridlock that we saw, for example, in the United States in the 2016 presidential election, and avoid, one individual law enforcement agency from going out and saying something, and trying to create a process and to announce that well in advance so Canadians could understand the process which would lead to such an announcement should it occur. The hope, of course, is that it doesn't occur and we don't need to use it, but it's always better to prepare and plan for the worst.
And obviously, there would be a very high threshold set for when this might be implemented. Can you give the kind of examples of the kinds of things that would trigger this mechanism?
So I'm cautious in doing that because I think everything is very context dependent, and I wouldn't want to prejudge the outcome of the panel and their decision. However, I think it's safe to assume that some of the major incidents that we've seen around the world, for example, the Macron leaks or what the U.S. was grappling with at the time, would be things of sufficient value to inform Canadians. But again, it will be very context dependent, and it will be within the context of the Canadian election, which is different, right?
Minute.
Good.
Yeah.
In that case, my other question would be about the fact that it's multi-party involvement. What kind of safeguards are there to make sure that this is completely nonpartisan, completely neutral, and that no one political party would be able to manipulate that system?
So that's why since the CSE put out the report in June 2017, we have been meeting with all of the major political parties represented in the House of Commons, both to facilitate a connection with CSE so that they can provide technical advice should parties choose to avail themselves of that. And we are not informed of whether that relationship carries on or not. We simply facilitate the connection. And have been meeting with political parties on an ongoing basis to build that trust. And as I mentioned in my remarks, I have been very encouraged by the fact that all of the major political parties represented in the House of Commons have really been at the table with regards to this. So, and we will also be extending security clearance to all of the leaders represented in the House of Commons, as well as 3 of their top campaign aides, and they will be briefed on an ongoing basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vanderbilt. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. Thank you to the officials that are here for the second hour. And I wonder if you have had time to read first the interim report that this committee filed last July, and then most recently our final report in December titled Democracy Under Threat, Risks and Solutions in the Era of Disinformation and Data Monopoly, which dealt very closely with the Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, aggregate IQ scandal and associated attempts to interfere in elections in North America and in Great Britain. And I wonder what your comments are on the recommendations from this committee and from previous recommendations in our review of the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Data Act, the PIPEDA review that was done by this committee, which recommended greater powers, greater order-making powers for the Privacy Commissioner and more substantial, more significant penalties for violations of Canadians' privacy, including with regards to the democratic electoral process.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I have read both of the reports, and as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I thank the committee because I think it's A, really good work, but B, I think it was being done even before this became a really sexy topic. So I congratulate you on that. I would note that with regards to both of the reports, there are several items that have been addressed and incorporated both in Bill C-76 as well as our announcement a couple of weeks ago with regards to protecting democracy. So, for example, in the first report, Recommendation 5 is captured in C-76 as well as recommendations
for the foreign charitable funding. 76 doesn't cover foreign charitable funding through the CRA.
Right, but to prevent foreign funding and influence in domestic elections, right. Well, so it's with regards to any foreign funding towards third parties or political parties or candidates.
Lead Now is funded by foreign charitable funds channeled through organizations like Tides Canada.
So I'm not sure that there's evidence of that, but that would be something. We would refer
you to testimony in this committee of Ms. Vivian Krause.
So again, we have the Commissioner of Canada Elections, that would be responsible for investigating that. That's not something that has come up, and I would caution against those allegations. But I do think that it is important to note that in C-76, that was seen at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, and I see Ms. Kuzi here, who played a substantial role in that. We were able to have significant all-party consensus with regards to banning foreign funding with regards to third parties in our elections.
Now, with
so
regards
that's
to,
been a very productive engagement.
With regards to the Critical Election Incident Public Protocol panel, I'm wondering why there are two significant omissions there in terms of the presence of the Chief Electoral Officer and the Privacy Commissioner, both who have much more relevance, I believe, with regards to the protection of privacy, the protection of the electoral process. Certainly, these officials are well equipped with regards to foreign hacking, foreign electronic digital interference. But with regards to the recommendations that the Privacy Commissioner has been making for a couple of years now, I'm surprised that he doesn't have a look in on this panel.
So if I may, this panel is specifically put in place to deal with foreign threats to our democracy. We have Canadian legislation and mechanisms through the Commissioner of Canada Elections and the RCMP should there be a breach of Canadian law domestically. This is specifically with regards to foreign interference in the election. And if I may just read out the statement from the CEO of Elections Canada, who after the announcement he himself confirmed that he is an officer of Parliament, not part of the Government of Canada. And as I quote, in its preparations for the next federal election, Elections Canada has been working closely with the national security agencies and the Commissioner of Canada Elections. We rely on their expertise so we can focus on our primary objective, administering the election and ensuring Canadians know where, when, and ways to register and vote, end quote. And so with regards to a matter of national security, that's where the Government of Canada and a whole of government approach through this critical incident election public protocol will come into play. However, with regards to the administration of the election, of course, the CEO of Elections Canada will remain the primary interlocutor that Canadians can count and trust on.
Now, with regards to this panel's activities in a situation during the writ period, which would involve something like the deepening SNC Lavalin scandal, the Prime Minister's original claim that the media report of allegations of attempted obstruction of justice, political interference, the pressure on the former Attorney General, this panel, given the clerk's testimony last week, would suggest that he would, in that case, if there was successive electronic retweeting of that story, would very possible side with the government, as you said, and make it bring into some doubt the ability of this panel.
I should clarify, because at no point did I say that the clerk would side with the government on something. That's something that you said just now. But what is important, and what I did say, was with regards to the fact that there would be a panel of 5 individuals who are senior public servants. They would be notified by the heads of the relevant national security agencies should those heads of the national security agencies have sufficient reason to believe that there is an incident that merits their attention, that is of sufficient value that it would impede the ability for free and fair elections coming from a foreign threat. This panel of 5 would have to make a collective decision based on consensus as to whether or not they are going to inform the public. At the same time, all of the major political parties represented in the House of Commons, their leaders and up to 3 of their senior staff of their choosing will receive security clearances, will all be briefed at the same time in terms of what is going on, so that we have transparency with regards to that, and they have all of the same information that's coming to them. And that is a very important element of this, to ensure that everyone is getting information.
If there are
at the same
differences
time.
of opinion between the party representatives with the recommendations of the committee, how would that be resolved?
So it is up to the panel to make that decision, not up to the political parties, but they will receive the information at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Angus.
Thank you, Ms. Gould, for coming today. Who at Facebook did you meet with?
At Facebook, I met with Kevin Chan here, and then I would have to get you the names of the five other individuals because I don't remember off the
Kevin
top.
Chan,
As
who
well
was not
as
registered as a
5
lobbyist, who
individuals
met with numerous
from-
people in the government's office, who's a former member working for the Liberals. So Kevin Chan was your voice?
As I
Because
said, there were.
I got to say,
sorry,
you know, we
Mr.
spent
Angus, would you let me
just
speak?
sorry,
Would
no,
it-
I'm
do I have
asking my
permission?
questions
Because
here.
I'm trying to
I'm
answer
asking
it.
my questions here. If it was Kevin Chan,
So, but
we
I-
spent
you haven't
over
let
a
me
year studying
answer.
this. We spent over a year studying this. We could not get a straight answer out of Facebook. So if Kevin Chan was your source, I just want that on the record.
But
because
Mr. Angus, I said there were
So
5 other individuals who we met
above
with
or
as
below
well,
Mr. Chan?
who came from Washington and Silicon Valley.
So would you give us their names?
Happily, I just
Thank
don't
you.
have them right now.
Thank you. You know, we did spend over a year. I guess I'm a little touchy. We spent over a year studying this. We worked internationally and domestically. And I see the report that you come out. I mean, it's so, I don't know, it sounds to me so much Cold War. You know, we got the G7 rapid response. We got the critical assessment room. Everything that we found is very opposite of what you have coming forward with. And you ignored our key recommendations, one of which is the role of the chief electoral officer. So it will now be under Michael Wernick from the Privy Council, but we had said all along that the electoral officer has an important role to play. And the reason I say that is that in the middle of an election, things get very heated, very, very heated. So if this critical G7 rapid response team that you bring in suddenly announces there's a threat, it could really destabilize an election. So
Good response
what we would
mechanism.
need is
It's
real
important to
confidence.
clarify the roles
We
and
would
not
need
to
real
conflate
confidence, right?
different
Real
issues.
confidence. So I'm wondering why you've appointed Michael Wernick to that position and not the chief electoral
So,
officer to make that
If
decision.
if
to
you'll let
Canadians.
me answer your question, I would be happy to. As I had literally just responded to Mr. Kent, not a minute or two ago, I will repeat what the
I
chief
heard that.
electoral officer
So
said.
I heard that, but
which
I'm
is
asking
the
why
point that he is
Mr.
an
Wernick
officer.
and not the
He is
electoral.
an officer
Okay.
of Parliament and not part of the government of Canada. He is
Okay.
separate from that. When we're talking about something that is of a national security issue, that is the government of Canada that will do that. During an election period, we have something called the Caretaker Convention,
Right.
which takes over to ensure continuity of government. It is important.
Yes, I understand that. So I guess my concern is I share Mr. Wernick's concern. I share Mr. Wernick's concern about the rising tide of political extremism. But I was very surprised that he suggested political assassination in the midst of a parliamentary hearing on whether the government had done wrong. Do you not realize that that would breach the rules for the Privy Council, that they're not to wade into matters of conjecture and controversy? Yet he started out a question to the panel about whether or not the government was involved in interfering with the rule of law, and he related it not just to political assassination, but he says, I worry that the reputations of honorable people who served their country being besmirched and dragged through the market square. I worry about the trolling from the vomitorium of social media entering the open media area. Most of all, I worry about people losing faith. So is that the position of the government, or is that his opinion?
You would have to ask him that question.
Okay.
That was his personal view, is my understanding.
Okay, because under the guidelines for the Privy Council officials, and I think your people beside you have read it, quote, officials may give explanations in response to questions having to do with complex policy matters, but they do not defend policy or engage in debate. In other matters, principally those having to do with the administration of the department and its programs, must be strictly limited. Matters of policy and political controversy have been reserved exclusively for ministers, principally because political answerability on the part of officials would inevitably draw them into controversy, destroy their political utility to the system, and indeed undermine the authority and responsibility of the ministers. So my concern is that Mr. Wernick, using a committee hearing to advance all manner of personal political conjectures, number one, about how ethical the Prime Minister is, number two, how amazing Ms. Bennett was, number three, how terrible it was that people criticized her on Twitter, used his position to advance an agenda which is destroying his utility as someone that we can all look to and say, you know what, in a matter of real political tension, we can trust him. Do you not see that?
Someone who has The oversight of the entire government and operations will clearly have a unique position in terms of how they are feeling and the threats that they can see arising on the horizon. I think that one thing that's very important is to recognize that in developing the critical incident election public protocol, we were deliberate in bringing together a panel of 5 senior public servants so that it would not fall on one civil servant to make that decision.
And I would not have had anything to say about Mr. Warnock
issues.
before his testimony, but being that he has very strict obligations as the Chief Privy Council, about what he can give opinions on, and yet he said about Madame Bennett, he said, I'm deeply hurt that her reputation has been trolled. There are vile things that have been said. There's no Canadian who's worked harder on Indigenous reconciliation than the Honourable Carolyn Bennett. That may or may not be, but the people who've been challenging her on Twitter are Indigenous grassroots who do not support her position. So if he thinks it's vile, my concern is that when people say very controversial things in an election, and people will, and when people attack us and they attack government, at what point can we trust that Mr. Warnock will know the difference between what is fair and what is unfair criticism? And the fact that he has waded into matters of controversy in ignoring his obligations, to me, puts him in question, whereas I have no questions about the Chief Electoral Office, but I certainly have questions about this incident team that you have with Mr. Warnock.
I will just reiterate, Mr. Angus, that the panel that we've put together will not come together unless the national security agencies raise an issue of national security for them to consider. Which
would it be better for the Chief Electoral Officer to say, yes, this is serious, whereas Michael Warnock seems to think that people attacking government ministers is beyond the line.
The electoral officer is as an officer of Parliament and to administer the elections.
Thank you.
And so this is a separate issue and a separate role that they have. And with regards to the panel, I think it is extraordinarily important to reiterate that they will only come together should one of the heads of the national security agencies deem that they have seen foreign interference of a significant level to get them together to inform
the public to have confidence. And that's my question. If Mr. Warnock crossed the line in his Privy Council obligations, if we have that trust. And I'm not sure that trust exists right now.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Saini.
Good afternoon, Minister. Thank you very much for coming here this afternoon, especially with your colleagues. I want to start off with a question on one of the pillars that you mentioned, is expecting social media platforms to act. And I know that you've been in discussions with them regarding transparency and making sure that the people who advertise or pay for advertisements, we know who they are, to combat the propagation of misinformation. However, there's one point I wanted to ask you on, if there's something that your department or some of the officials here could comment on, is that sometimes in, whether it be Reddit or Facebook, there's a comment section. And sometimes there can be infiltration by foreign actors or by other people who want to disrupt the election mechanism that we have here, where they can insert misinformation or disinformation within the comment section as is. Is there some protocol that we are looking at to prevent that from happening?
So we are not looking as a government to intervene in the conversations that are happening on social and digital platforms. That is not the role of the government. However, we expect that social media platforms will take an attitude and actions that are more responsible in terms of how their platforms are used to spread mis and disinformation. Obviously, that is more complicated if you're looking at the comments section as opposed to a post. However, what we do expect is for them to take down inauthentic behavior and inauthentic accounts. We have heard from both Twitter and Facebook the number of accounts that they have taken down. Both are in the realm of millions, and I could get you the specific numbers that we've heard if you're interested. And so, whereas I'm not entirely aware of the mechanism by which either of those platforms would go after the comment section, if they go after the account that is a fake account or is known to be from a foreign source and posing as a legitimate domestic actor, that may get at that issue.
The next question I have is, you talked about the rapid response mechanism with the G7, and I'm just wondering, obviously, I don't know the content of the sharing agreements, but obviously they're to make the system more robust for all of the G7 countries. I'm not necessarily worried about that because I think there's enough resources within the G7 to create a system that's robust. My worry is more with nascent democracies, or even going beyond the G7 to the G20. Recently there were elections in Nigeria, and there has been some speculation that there has been foreign interference, and there has been foreign interference prior to this election in Nigeria, and you mentioned some other countries. I'm just wondering, because I think that, if you make the G7 strong, that's great, but it doesn't really do anything else for the democracies in the rest of the world. Has there been any thinking on the government, on your department's part, that whatever best practices or whatever practices that you have that are robust, that they would be shared with other countries who may not have the same resources or the same capacity as we have in this country?
So I thank you for your question. My focus has really been on Canada's democracy, and where I've had conversations with foreign counterparts have really been about learning from their experiences to see what we could glean and apply here in the Canadian context. I will say that apart from the European Union, I think Canada is really kind of leading the way in terms of protecting our democracy from foreign cyber threats. And I think the elements that we announced on January 30th really set the stage for that. That being said, I know that there are efforts to ensure that whatever we learn is being shared with counterparts and allies. And I've heard from many other countries that they're looking to us as well in terms of what we do and how they might apply that in their own jurisdictions.
And just my final question is more of a personal question. As you know, the election campaign is coming up. There may be things that are said in social media about certain candidates, true or untrue. What's the mechanism to resolve something that is untrue?
So in C76, there was a tightening based on the recommendations from the former CEO of Elections Canada to tighten the language surrounding false statements made against candidates. The idea was that the previous clause in the Elections Act was too vague, that it was so unenforceable. So we tightened it up so that it would be based on statements that you could prove or disprove. So for example, if someone accused candidate X of having a criminal record, that's something that you could prove or disprove. And the mechanism, like all with regards to our elections legislation, is a complaint filed to the Commissioner of Canada Elections, for which they would then respond. And the resources to the Commissioner have been increased. And I think another very important element of this is that the Commissioner has been both moved back into Elections Canada, but also empowered to initiate and lay charges as well as compel testimony. And so their powers have been strengthened so that they can be more effective in applying our legislation.
So my final question is, and I think that this is very important, is one of your pillars is enhancing citizen preparedness, because I think that the more education citizens have, the more robust the system will be, because there'll be less ambiguity. And you mentioned something in your opening comments about creating a digital citizen initiative. Could you just give us a little background on what that is?
Certainly. So one of the pieces of advice that I think is probably the best that I've heard, but also the most relevant, is that when we're talking about cyber threats to our democracy, ultimately the target is the citizen. And around the world, counterparts have highlighted the fact that a resilient citizenry is the best tool with regards to fighting back against mis and disinformation campaigns. And so we announced $7 million for our digital citizenship initiative that will provide funding to civil society organizations in the realms of digital media and civic literacy. And I think that this is an extraordinarily important initiative. I think over the past couple of years, particularly with the 2016 U.S. elections, it was a bit of a wake-up call to Western democracies in the sense that we were taking our democracy a little bit for granted. And I think it's important to ensure that we continue to talk about democracy and democratic values in our own countries. Otherwise, we could stand the chance of losing it.
Thank you.
That's good. Thank you, Mr. Saini. Next up for 5 minutes, Ms. Kuzi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Minister, always lovely to see you. I love that necklace, by the way. That's just beautiful. Also, I want to say that I really enjoyed your speech yesterday at the AI. And you know what? It was very informal. And I think you should go with that format more when you come even to committees, because you do it so well. So I wanted to compliment you on that. But there you talked a lot about vulnerabilities. That was kind of a major theme for you. And of course, as the opposition, we very much take serious our responsibility to hold the government to account in terms of safeguarding the election. Yet, certainly, at almost every step, I would say, we feel as though the government has failed and has not gone far enough in terms of taking the steps which are required to safeguard the election. So examples I would use from C76 were the social platform registry, sort of the most basic of information, really, in my opinion, and didn't perhaps go far enough in terms of protecting Canadians, in terms of providing information as well as data management. My colleague made mention of the foreign interference aspect, and I've said this several times before. We as the official opposition put forward over 200 amendments, and many of them which were rejected. And as I have said previously, I feel very strongly that what we came out with C76 was a slap on the hand for foreign interference. This is bad. You shouldn't do this. Rather than legislating the specific mechanisms, such as, for example, segregated bank accounts, which would make foreign interference from a monetary perspective impossible. And more relevant to what my colleague, the Honourable Peter Kent, mentioned, the funding outside of the writ and pre-writ periods, which is really open season still, and which is, as we've come to see, severely affecting other parts of our democracy, including both immigration as well as something very dear to my heart as an Albertan, pipeline approval. And that's kind of just the beginning. I certainly won't go on to our positions in terms of the vulnerabilities created by non-resident voting, the vulnerabilities created by voter identification cards, the vulnerabilities created by the changes in Bill C-76 to vouching. So this is something you've said that is very important to you and to the government, yet we see the steps not being taken to absolutely go to the furthest length possible to protect these electoral processes. And it was touched upon yesterday, and my colleague, Mr. Saini, mentioned it briefly in his questioning earlier, but it was something mentioned by a former member of the Liberal government and the Liberal cabinet, someone I have much respect for, and is a former colleague of mine from Foreign Affairs, Alan Rock. And it was in regards to, again, the management of social media platforms. That, of course, we were always looking for a balance in society. But as I stated in my testimony at PROC last week, that we have to rely on these corporations with the objectives to maximize shareholder value, to take it upon themselves to self-regulate. And, certainly I understand that opens up for questions such as free speech, etc. But, he did mention a concern that perhaps more than nudging needs to take place. And my concern is also with your response, or what seemed to be your response, and I'll, of course, give you the opportunity to address that you seem to want to put it upon PROC to do a study. So, if you decide to take action with legislation, you can say, well, the committee did a study and this is what they told me, and sort of giving you that coverage. So I'm asking you, please, if you are ready in regards to the social media platform, willing to make the hard decisions, to take the hard actions, and not 6 months from now, but now, please.
Thank you, Ms. Kuzi. I do understand that you actually put a motion forward at PROC to study this issue, and
Did.
yes, so that would be the committee making that decision. And one thing that I do want to clarify, because this is the second time you've mentioned it, is in fact in C-76, third parties are now required to have separate bank accounts so that they can account for all of the money that's coming in. And that, I think, was actually a really important issue to put forward, particularly to account where money is coming from. with regards to the vulnerabilities that I mentioned yesterday and often on this topic, you can pull those directly from the CSE report on threats to cyber threats to our democracy, and they highlight very clearly that the principal threats with regards to cyber interference are with regards to mostly people. Right? So politicians, political parties, and the media. Anytime there's human interaction. And often is the case is that those individuals and actors on the one hand may not be practicing what is called good cyber hygiene, so two-factor authentication and ensuring that they're protecting their accounts as well as possible, but also with regards to being susceptible to influence strategies and campaigns. And so when talking about those vulnerabilities, those are the ones that I was referring to. With regards to C76 on the whole, I'm quite proud of the legislation because I think the primary objective of it is to ensure that all Canadians have the possibility to vote. And I think that was really important in terms of extending vouching for our most vulnerable Canadians, in terms of ensuring that the voter information card can be used to establish residency, which we know, for example, for single senior women is often a barrier to going and voting because they don't have those pieces of residential information.
Thank you, Minister. We're past time. So.
Oh, okay. Well, anyways, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up for 5 minutes, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Thanks very much. Thank you for being here, Minister. So our committee has recommended imposing a duty on social media platforms to remove manifestly illegal content in a timely fashion, including hate speech, harassment, and disinformation, or risk monetary sanctions. And I just want to read a comment. This was in response to a media article about the hate and threats from the Yellow Vest movement. Interestingly, I think if they knew that the Yellow Vest movement in France was calling for a wealth tax and minimum wage, maybe they wouldn't associate with the Yellow Vest movement so much here in Canada. But they said, Trudeau is a traitor to our country and deserves to be hung for his treasonous crimes. And that's posted on Facebook, that's left on Facebook. Facebook doesn't take it down. So should we expect social media companies to act, or should we require them to act?
So I should clarify that my expectations have to fall within the electoral context at this point, as I'm Minister of Democratic Institutions. However, that being said, I think that we are moving in a direction where we need to require social media companies to act. That is outside the scope of my specific mandate right now. But I think that when we have very clear evidence that they are contravening laws here in Canada, that they should be acting responsibly in that manner.
I appreciate that. And so within your mandate, we have C76, which rightfully creates a registry of ads, both in the writ and pre-writ period. Is there any confidence in the conversations you've had with Facebook and others that they will ensure that that database is as accessible as possible, with journalists in mind specifically?
That is the assurances that I have had from Facebook. I know that all of the social media companies are also looking to speak with Elections Canada to get clarification, because Elections Canada ultimately will interpret the law and determine how that is. But that is my understanding, is that they're trying to make that accessible and available to Canadians.
With respect to C76, the focus is on transparency of advertising, and that's really important. But there was an interesting comment when Mr. Zimmer and I were in Washington last July for a roundtable, and Senator Warner said when they started looking into this issue, advertising was their main focus, and that turned out to be the tip of the iceberg. And it was actually the hijacking of the algorithms themselves that was the real problem, whether it's the IRA troll farms, the Internet Research Agency troll farms, or some other organizations. How do you see the steps that your office has taken as a solution to that problem?
So I've read Senator Warner's report as well, and I think it's very interesting in this space, and probably one of the better reports that I've read. I tend to see the steps that we've taken as steps to address the problems we've identified so far. and understanding that this is an evolving field, and our understanding of the issue continues to grow. And I will say that, in terms of full disclosure, as minister responsible for this portfolio, when I came into it, I was thinking about hack and leak attempts, right? And over the course of the past 2 years, what our understanding of the issue has changed dramatically. And so I think that we are right now, as an international community, but also here in Canada, trying to understand the depth and the breadth of the issue and to come up with solutions that will attack the core of the problem. And that's where I thank the committee for doing the work that you've done, because I think it's really important in informing next steps.
My last question is with respect to, you mentioned hacks, but I read CSE's threat assessment report. I understand there might be a new one forthcoming, but I read the last one, and it said, as I understand it, they said that the electoral system has great integrity and not so worried about Elections Canada being hacked and the voting system being hacked, but that it's us as political actors that are the great weakness in this, and we've seen MPs and senators already hacked as far as it goes. So when I look at $7 million for a Digital Citizens Initiative, and I think, how's $7 million spent across the country? How are we actually going to educate Canadians between now and October? Wouldn't that $7 million for training purposes and for education purposes actually be better allocated to educate politicians, to educate political staff, to educate volunteers, to educate riding associations, and to make sure that I get the training that I need and my staff and volunteers get the training we need to make sure we are going to prevent our accounts being hacked?
So there's an issue of parliamentary privilege with that, in terms of Parliament gets to decide what information you choose to use and not use. We did, in the announcement, put out a series of infographics and educational tools that I invite any parliamentarian or Canadian to use and look at as to how best to protect themselves. The CSE, the Cyber Center, which Andre can speak a bit afterwards, is stood up, but will be available for parliamentarians as well as politicians and their political entities, should they so choose to use it. And we will be reinforcing the Get Cyber Safe campaign as well. But I do think that we all have a little bit of ownership and responsibility to make sure that we are demonstrating leadership in this area. And that being said, you can practice the very best cyber hygiene out there and still be a victim of a hack.
Thanks
very much.
Thank you. Just for the room, we have three more questioners to ask questions. We were started a little bit late, so hopefully that's not a problem for the minister. So we're going to go to Mr. Gourd for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for being here, Minister. Canadians are no doubt very concerned about what we've been hearing regarding digital threats, threats through Facebook. Everything we heard about the last elections in the US could happen in Canada. That ad or the fake news on Facebook that takes a great deal of time to report and get taken down. News announced on Facebook stay out for 24 to 48 hours, regardless of how fake they may be or whichever party they're attacking. So by the time we hear that it's not true, it's already gone right into Canadians' heads. Now, if that keeps happening, it's all very well having a task force, but how will we deal with the fake news that is going to be in media like Facebook? I don't believe it's the government's role to decide what news is fake or what news is real. That is a 21st century problem because we live in a world that is tremendously mediatized, in which news travels very, very quickly. I think it is also the role and responsibility of traditional media, who need to ensure that they don't report fake news. And politicians have platforms that enable them to say what they think. I believe that digital platforms have a responsibility as well, a responsibility to ensure that they're not being manipulated. I'm still an optimist, albeit a realist, but still an optimist. I believe that during the US presidential elections, digital platforms were not seeking to be manipulated, and at least now they are in fact seeking ways of avoiding that kind of abuse. It's insufficient, and it's not all they're not doing everything they could do, but people are certainly more aware. They're certainly more aware that such misinformation exists. As I said earlier, this may not be the solution, but one thing we could do is raise awareness among Canadians about these potential threats, since they want to be making informed decisions when they make decisions regarding awareness. Is it the role of Elections Canada to conduct an awareness campaign at the beginning of the election campaign to make sure Canadians are aware that this manipulation exists, and to tell them to be particularly careful? If you see false news, report it. Call us if you feel you're being harmed by what's happening in social media. Thank you. That's an excellent question. Since Elections Canada are at arm's length from the government, that might be a question for the Chief Electoral Officer. What I can say is that in Bill C-76, we have restored his or her power to inform Canadians on elections. So if that is something the Chief Electoral Officer believes he or she should do, then that power exists. I understand that the next elections will be crucial in this new media environment, and we'll all be watching the proceedings closely as lawmakers and as people in this environment. So should we be ready to take action after the election? I think we will need to look back after the next election and see what happened. A post-mortem will be important. The CSC report is very interesting, and after the next elections, they will thoroughly examine what happened. I think it would be both appropriate and important for Parliament to revisit the subject then. I also imagine that the Chief Electoral Officer will submit a report after the next elections, in which he will set out suggestions, as he does after all general elections, suggestions as to how elections legislation can be improved in this country. Thank you.
For sharing the information that you did. I might repeat myself, but I know that you have probably more to share about the question that I have. Alors, ma première question, et vous savez que nous prenons...
My first question. You know how seriously we take the entire issue of protecting elections against threats and foreign interference. As you know, we carefully examined violations by Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. For the past few months, the members of this committee have made an important step forward, working with parliamentary committees from around the world to get to the bottom of it all. As you know, Minister, our committee has been doing this in a very non-partisan fashion since the repercussions on our election system concern all Canadians.
Is how sure can Canadians be that combating interference from foreign actors, be they quasi-governmental or individuals working alone, is a priority for our government?
I think they should be very assured that this is absolutely a priority. I mean, this is something that I have been working on in terms of a whole of government approach. The announcement that I made brought together on January 30th brought together the ministers of defense, public safety, heritage, ISED, and justice in many respects. This is something that we have a ADM working group going on looking at this issue. The topic for which I was invited to come, the site task force, brings together CSIS, CSE, the RCMP, and global affairs to really ensure that the whole of government is taking this matter seriously, because there's not much that's more important than our wonderful democracy that we have here in Canada.
Puis ma prochaine question, c'est de comprendre, et peut-être le comité peut mieux comprendre, comment, dans l'éventualité qu'il y aurait une ingérence qui serait détectée lors de nos élections, comment les fonctionnaires ou les gens qui vont travailler dans le système du gouvernement pourraient alerter les Canadiens des conséquences et également des conséquences des interventions qui sont faites. Donc, est-ce que vous pouvez partager avec les Canadiennes et les Canadiens comment ce processus fonctionnerait?
Oui, bien sûr. Alors, comme j'ai mentionné, nous avons le protocole pour les élections s'il y a une incident critical. Et ça, c'est un groupe de 5...
Minister, just hold on. We lost our French translation. Just give us a second.
Okay.
As I pointed out, we have a protocol, and we have a panel of 5 people. I think we shared these charts with the committee. They're available on the website. It would be a process that involves awareness for national security agencies. They will inform the panel of 5 officials who will comprise the Deputy Ministers of Justice, Global Affairs, Public Safety, and the Director of the National Security and Intelligence Agency, as well as the Clerk of the Privy Council. They will together come to a decision to determine whether all Canadians need to be informed. And that threshold will be very high. It will meet the requirements for having a free and fair elections. That's the threshold. If Canadians receive a message from the panel, it will be because there was an incident of foreign interference, real foreign interference, that has a genuine impact on elections. I'd like to understand whether at some point there will be sanctions, penalties, for those who interfere with the election systems. Do you think penalties are required? That is something the Minister of Foreign Affairs will have to decide. It is illegal, as it is in our Elections Act, under our Elections Act, to have foreign interference. Foreign interference is already illegal, in other words, as is collusion between a national actor and a foreign actor. It would be up to the RCMP and the Chief Electoral Officer to take action.
Mr. Chair, exactly 1 year ago, the Prime Minister issued a very stern statement to Facebook. He said, clean up your act or we'll regulate you. And then that never happened. And our committee then began our study, which really brought us down the rabbit hole of some really dark operators. So I feel a real disconnect when I hear, we're talking about, foreign actors and foreign players in foreign countries, it seems, jamming the phone lines on election day, when what we've seen, it could be 2 guys above an optometrist shop with good data sets and the ability to switch and turn votes 100 here, 50 there, that can actually dismantle the democratic system. And when we met with 17 jurisdictions around the world, they all expressed their frustration about the unwillingness of Facebook to take any responsibility. In fact, our sister committee in the UK has called them digital gangsters. Now, yesterday, the Toronto Star did an editorial that said Ottawa should stand up to big tech on privacy and democracy. It said, quote, "Our government seems uncertain, even paralyzed in the face of multiple challenges posed by the tech giants. The United States and Europe are taking strong action to counter some of the worst effects on Facebook, but Ottawa seems content to sit on the sidelines." That's not me saying that. That's the Toronto Star yesterday after they presumably got to see your report. So I have two quick questions. One, what assurances did you get from Facebook that nobody else internationally seems to have gotten? And number two, to reiterate, will you give us the names of who you spoke to at Facebook so we can invite them to see what kind of reassurances the Canadian people will get?
Mr. Angus, as I said in my last response to you, I will happily give you the names of the individuals. I just don't remember them off the top of my head, but we will get those to you. With regards to regulating social media, I actually do want to clarify that, in fact, I did regulate them through C76, through the online ad registry that they will have to comply with in the upcoming election. I think that is a really important step, and it's the first time, to my knowledge, that this has happened internationally. With regards to assurances from Facebook, I don't have the assurances that give me full confidence that they are going to be completely seized with this and doing everything necessary, which is why I continue to have conversations with them. And
why are we having conversations with them about our democratic system? That's my concern. If you're not completely satisfied, then I'm really not satisfied because you're meeting with them. Why are we being tiptoeing around with a company that has shown such manifest disregard for undermining elections around the world? Why are we not talking about serious consequences like Germany's moving forward to, like Europe's talking about? Do you not believe that our election system is still compromised with the ability of third-party actors domestically to flip that Facebook platform because Facebook simply will not live up to its obligations?
So I think that it's important to look at the strength of our electoral legislation and to recognize that in C76, if that's why we put the provision in with regards to the malicious use of a computer, that is not allowed to happen, and that we do have a strong electoral system and legislation here in Canada. We have also strengthened the rules with regards to third parties in terms of advertising, in terms of how they disclose their finances, which I think is really important. I have confidence in our elections legislation domestically. I still need to see more from the social media companies, and that's why I am engaging with them and I am making demands of them, and will be completely transparent with Canadians about how those goes, and I will be happy to have further conversations with you on this because I think it is of the utmost importance.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. I had a couple of comments for the minister just before we close. I guess the phrase that came to me before when I saw the legislation, C76, is we're bringing a knife to a gunfight. But in reality, we're not even bringing a knife, we're bringing a panel to a gunfight. And I guess the concern is around, especially with some very clear recommendations in our report, 26 very clear recommendations that were very specific, to see very little of that taken up by the minister. And then what was been, I guess, talked about in committee here as a whole is expecting social media platforms to act as your final point, as if that's supposed to make them treat it more seriously. I'll just refer you to a quote from the Information Commissioner from the UK that was later reiterated by our own Privacy Commissioner. "I think the time for self-regulation is over," Denham said. "That ship has sailed." So I guess I just wonder from the minister, why do we still let them self-regulate and expect them to do the right thing when they haven't up to this point? I guess what I'm concerned about, I think what all this panel and this committee is concerned about, is that it's been mentioned before, we're in a Cold War, the Cold War reference that was brought up, but we're in a digital reality, and we're still treating it like a Cold War problem. Can you just, I guess, with those comments, do you think you're doing enough? Thank you.
So I would say that For many of the elements in both of your reports that have to do with elections, you can see that reflected not entirely, but fairly closely, both in C76 and the announcement that we made with regards to protecting democracy. On some of the other elements that are outside of my mandate, I will note that my colleague, Minister Baines, is conducting public consultations and will be coming out with a report specifically with regards to privacy and data and how companies use that in the near term, is my understanding. I think that, and as I have said many times before, this is one of the great challenges that we're facing right now. We have, in many ways, for a long time, just looked at the tremendous benefits that social media and the digital world have brought us. And I think that 2016 was a real wake-up call for everyone around the world in terms of what was going on. And like many moments in history, we now have to figure out exactly how we tackle this problem in a way that hopefully, on the one hand, continues to encourage the positive elements of social media, the ability for people to connect in ways that they've never been able to connect before, the great democratizing abilities that it has in terms of sharing opinions and views that I think are extraordinarily positive, but also mitigating the risks and the social harms that we are seeing happening. And one of the things that I have, thought about over the past 2 years, but year in particular, as a lot more of this stuff has come to light, is the fact that there have been very few moments or times really when you have one industry that is so encompassing in so many aspects of our lives that it's difficult to attack it from just one position, right? And so whether it's from democracy or whether it's from privacy or whether it's from a public safety or a law enforcement or whatever the case may be. And we need to start thinking a bit more holistically about these digital giants and how we approach them. And that's where I think the work of your committee has been very helpful in terms of helping us think about some of these issues and how we manage them in a way that aligns with our values and our societal norms moving forward.
Thank you, Minister. We'll suspend for just a few minutes while you make your exit, Minister, and then we'll have the other members present.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Suspend. We'll call the meeting back to order. First of all, we have a point of order from Mr. Angus.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I wanted to just put on the record my concern out of our last week meeting with Waterfront Toronto. We received two forms of correspondence. One was an official letter from Jim Balsillie where he said that the parliamentary secretary lied about what he said and was misrepresenting facts, and he wants to set the record straight. We also received correspondence. I don't believe we got the letter, but from Julie DiLorenzo, who said false statements were made. I am concerned because we've been approaching all our work in a very particular way. I don't have. I'm worried about turning this into a battle between Mr. Vaughan and Mr. Basili, but I think Mr. Basili has a right to appear, and I think Julie DiLorenzo, if she said that false statements were made during that hearing, that she should be allowed to speak as well. And then I think we just need to find a format to make it work so that they can present and we can, get to this and then move on.
Yeah. I'll speak to it. So the letter was received by the chair, and I believe we're just waiting for it to be translated. It should be ready by tomorrow afternoon, what Mike has just said. Further to that, we have invited Mr. Balsillie to come back and speak to the committee, and he's not able to come Thursday, so we're just looking at a date when he is able to come back. So that's already been done based on conversations with the vice chairs and myself. So the letter is just outstanding to the committee, and again, it'll be coming tomorrow. So is that...
Well, also Ms. DiLorenzo, who I believe may have been on the real estate committee, or she had something to do with Waterfront Toronto, said she was getting her lawyer to work with her on a letter. So I would like us to reach out to her. Are we going to get an official letter? Will she make a statement so that at least we can get, I want a clarity in terms of what happened with testimony.
Yeah, and the chair can do that. Can just ask exactly. I'll just make sure the analysts have that to make that request. Sure. Okay, perfect. Okay, we'll continue on. We'll start off with the same order. Is there a different lead speaker or question? There's no presentation from the group. It's just right into questions. So I'll give the first 7 minutes to Erskine Smith. Go ahead for 7 minutes.
Sure. Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks to new witnesses and to witnesses we've had before. And I specifically for CSE as a starting point, I mentioned I've read previous threat assessment, and has anything changed since that threat assessment that we should know about?
Thank you for your question. I'll take this one if you don't mind. So the publication of the update to the threat assessment is imminent. It's actually providing my team the time necessary to also build the advice and guidance that's focused and targeted to the elements of that report. I'd hate today to pre-publish the report, but I would assure you that the elements of it that we are already aware of, we're not waiting for the report's publication to take action. So imminent, days, weeks, maximum probably.
And how much work directly, I know Minister said that she was sitting down with social media platforms. How much work from the security side of things do you do working directly with social media companies to ensure that their platforms are not being hijacked improperly?
Thank you. From a cyber center perspective, the presence of the ecosystem are all companies. So my concern starts with the equipment that we all use, the software that's on that equipment, the way we interact with that equipment in those networks. So from my perspective, social media companies are one element of that complex ecosystem, and we treat them just the same. So we engage with those companies and have the same expectations and their own practices and cybersecurity measures and their behavior in the ecosystem. And the response is similar to what other companies would have, from the device companies to the operating system or applications that ride on top.
And would you share our committee's concerns with respect to hateful content, inflammatory content that incites violence that stays on these platforms and is not appropriately dealt with in a timely fashion?
It is not the focus of the Cyber Center to analyze or make comments on the information carried by computers, emails, or social media content, but we do expect companies all companies to behave as good Canadian citizens and be mindful of their presence and their responsibilities in that presence in Canada. And so take it away from social media for a second, if a software company wasn't behaving in a way that's a good corporate citizen, we would have just as much of an objection with them.
Sure. Yeah, it was funny, Facebook relying upon free speech, which I'm a great defender of, and I don't think people should necessarily be thrown in jail for saying absurd, ridiculous things. But the idea that they can say these things on the Facebook platform and not have them taken down is a question as to what community Facebook actually wants to build. With respect to hijacking algorithms specifically then, and let's use the Internet Research Agency as an example, they'll have a number of, it's not just bots, but it's actually people managing a number of accounts, and to amplify a particular message, often a message of disinformation or misinformation. Is that something that your organization sees with?
Maybe I'll start and I'll offer Dan a few comments as well, but we certainly started a conversation with I expect all products in my ecosystem to be of the best quality possible. So if we were to observe or someone was reporting to us that there's something not right with the software, the hardware, would we investigate and try to get to the bottom of the story? Absolutely. And do something with the company? Absolutely. But there's also an opportunity in the foreign space, which I'll let Dan answer.
Yeah, happy to answer a little bit. From the foreign intelligence perspective, what we're looking at is foreign actors outside of Canada and what their intentions might be toward Canada. So one of the things that we can do to help inform the Cyber Centre or other elements of the Government of Canada to respond is to see those foreign actors, and if we can identify what behaviors they're taking, if we can see their online infrastructure or the types of botnets or types of techniques that they may be using, that'll be an edge that we can provide to the Cyber Centre to other people in government who within their mandates can respond.
Is there anything that the platforms can do that they are not currently doing to combat this problem of hijacking algorithms?
So that information would come to me from that team. We've never hesitated to engage with companies, domestic or foreign, in the quality and the behavior of their devices or software. We would do exactly the same in this instance.
I mentioned the Yellow Vest movement, and I read a hateful comment that was an incitement to violence. There are many, obviously, you can find across the internet if you go to look to the comment. Never read the comment section. We heard testimony from Michael Warnick that he was very concerned about violence in the upcoming election. Does it go beyond comments online like that? Are there real credible threat assessments that we should be concerned that there is to be violence in the upcoming election?
Well, what I can say from the national security and foreign intelligence perspective is that although a lot of what we've talked about today is in the cyberspace, of course, we look for threats of all kinds that might be directed toward Canadians, whether that's terrorism, cyber attacks, or other types of malign foreign activity that we might see perpetrated against Canada or Canadians. So in that space, there are existing mechanisms. This isn't a new challenge for us. If we see those types of things, we'll report them. CSIS, the RCMP, and others have the mandate to investigate those within Canada should they occur. And the intelligence function that we and others will have will provide them with any information we see. So if it comes up, we will be vigilant and we'll make sure that they have that information.
And Mr. Sutherland, I don't know if you can speak to Mr. Warnick's comment and maybe give us a little bit more detail, whether it was, is this based on just social media commentary and how nasty it tends to get, or is there a real threat at issue here that the comments were in relation to?
So I think Mr. Wernick was speaking from a personal view. He started his comments that way. I would say that the worry that he expressed is one broadly shared by people who look at issues around social inclusion, not just in Canada, but around the world.
Thanks very much. And the last question I would have is with respect to digital education outreach initiatives, and we know there's $7 million. Open question how effective we can be in a short period of time to educate Canadians about misinformation and disinformation on the internet. In the experience of CSE, knowing that political actors like ourselves are a weak link, as it were, do you think that funds would be better spent to ensure that volunteers on our teams, our riding associations, and those involved in campaigns, including ourselves, are doing everything we can to ensure we're not hacked and we're not vulnerable?
address a bit of that. So the $7 million announced are incremental funds towards specific activities. I think we can't lose sight of the fact that we've actually started, even before the first Threat to Democratic Institution report, and have engaged with all the participants that were mentioned in that report. So the activity, the ongoing activity of making people aware and talking about prevention has been ongoing for years, and that's a significant investment.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks again to all of you for appearing again before us today. I say again with regards to Mr. Rogers and Mr. Boucher, you were last with us on October 18th, I believe. And one of the questions that I asked you had to do with how you would handle something like the Beyonce play in the last federal election in the United States, where a Russian entity or individual created a fake fan website for the well-known popular star Beyonce, attracted millions of followers with simple celebrity gossip and information and pictures and so forth. And then a couple of days before the actual vote, this time bomb exploded with all sorts of statements and directions, apparently from Beyonce, which were intended, according to one of our previous witnesses, Dr. Ben Scott, to discourage black voters in the United States from participating in that election. And at the time we talked theoretically, and I don't want you to compromise or expose procedures and tactics, but I do want to talk about capability of the intelligence community and this new panel to respond in the critical last few days or even final hours before an election of something like the Beyonce play.
I can try and address the question. There's a couple of elements that I might suggest highlighting. One of those is that it's much easier to respond to something when we have good information and intelligence closer to the time. So as we are continuing our work with the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force, CSIS, RCMP, CSE, and Global Affairs will look to find out whether there are foreign actors trying to establish fake accounts and trying to pass disinformation on.
I could just interrupt. Obviously, those who would attack the electoral system are updating their tactics as we go along. They could very easily plant an actor, a bad actor, in Canada with a legitimate web address or identity, and they could carry out the same sort of thing within Canada. How would you detect that?
It's a good question, and a part of it is a hypothetical, but one of the things that I can say is if we are to look at the foreign end of that, if we can find intentions, plans, or any sort of capability being created to create that sort of account within Canada and see the foreign perspective, that will give an edge to the Cyber Centre and to other elements in Canada. And so that's what we're going to seek to do, and we're refining our intelligence collection. I, as you appreciate, can't get into the specifics of the techniques and the tools that we'll be using, but exactly our task between now and 2019 will be to refine our abilities to try and detect things like that.
Now, with regards to the National Cyber Threat Assessment 2018, does Canada actively in this election year, given what the contents of that assessment report, consider Russia to be an adversary?
The basis for our analysis is a global trend upwards in threat to democratic institutions. We don't spend inordinate amounts of time trying to attribute where bad behavior comes from. The resources that we have, we really turn towards detecting, finding solutions, and turning to prevention as early as possible. So I think it's important to realize, though, that, and that's in our reports, that these threats have been mounting, and Canada, being the key player in the world that it is likely to be a target of the same threats.
With regards to the minister reiterating the government's expectation that I think, as she said, it expects social media companies to take concrete actions to help safeguard this fall's election. And given the members of this committee, and I believe on both sides of the table, our lack of confidence in any of the social media companies to do what they profess, given that, as has been said here today, their focus is on growing their business plans and profitability, not on protecting privacy. And we've heard that from the Canadian Privacy Commissioner, we've heard it from the British Columbia Privacy Commissioner, the UK Privacy Commissioner, and any number of other individuals. And the bad faith with which some of these social media companies have demonstrated in appearing before us, I think prompted the question is, why does the minister have to wait 6 months when we have very little confidence and expectation that they will behave better? And I give it an example. Last year, when Mr. Chan first appeared before us, I asked a question during the course of our meeting. A viewer, a follower, emailed and said, "What about the Russian false posting in Latvia, which used old pictures of a famous Canadian convicted military officer wearing a woman's bikini, and that the message on that email was that warning Latvians that Canadian soldiers leading the battle group task force in Latvia would attempt to encourage homosexuality among Latvians." And Mr. Chan said he didn't know anything about that. More than a month later, my office communicated with him again and said that posting that we talked about when you were at committee is still up. So obviously a month later, although Mr. Chan and certainly the Facebook employees that were watching, the many monitors that he references, did nothing until we prompted again, and 3 days later it was taken down. So again, do any of you at that table really have the confidence that I believe members of this committee do not have in the social media to prevent the sorts of things that we fear may well happen during the election process?
So maybe a couple comments on that. I think the minister in her remarks stated very clearly that she has expectations of the social media companies and that the discussions are ongoing. And what I hear loud and clear from this committee is you have expectations of social media companies and that you've been disappointed by what you've seen so far and you expect more from them. That's a message that the minister can certainly take away and use in her subsequent discussions with them.
And
thank you. It's real quick.
A little tiny one. The minister mentioned elections in Europe this year as well as in Canada, but she didn't mention the recommendations of this committee in a number of reports now that the Canadian government consider implementing some of the very real and tangible measures that the EU brought in with the General Data Protection Regulations in May of last year, which go far beyond. Canada's not anywhere close to having the sorts of protections of Canadian privacy that the Europeans today have.
I can assure you the minister is current on what's happening in the EU.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kent. Next up, for 7 minutes, Mr. Angus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We have looked somewhat at foreign operators, but we have been very focused on the domestic threat and the ease of the manipulation of the platform. From an intelligence perspective, are you seeing any kind of rise in extremist language, extremist groups, extremist behavior in terms of political discussion in Canada?
Well, I can say from CSE's point of view, we are mandated to look exclusively at foreign actors outside of Canada by law. And so that's where we focus the majority, well, exclusively our foreign intelligence mandate, and unless we're working at the request of CSIS under our assistance mandate. With that, I can say that the threats that we're going to see are going to be published in the electoral context in the report that Andre mentioned earlier.
Well, I guess that's my concern. You're looking at foreign threats, yet we have Sons of Odin. We have people who can't get dates, who hate women, who call themselves incels. We have white nationalists. We have all manner of people. We have people who believe in giant lizard conspiracies in the flat earth. And they're not foreign threats, but they are dominating domestic discussion, and that's our focus has been the ability of this conversation domestically to be upended. So if it's not coming from a foreign source, how are we going to know that the domestic threat is understood, is calculable, and that we can actually come in with a credible response without it unfairly impinging on people's democratic rights to say whatever they want about politicians?
So I can comment on that too, and thank you for the question. I should say that the site task force that the minister mentioned brings together CSE, CSIS, RCMP, and Global Affairs Canada. And of course, CSIS and the RCMP will have a domestic mandate to do threat investigations within their mandates. So that's going to continue between now and 2019, and any threat-related activity that they see will be brought to the forefront for consideration.
I have spoken up publicly defending our present Prime Minister against some very vile attacks, because I think we have to have a standard of conversation. When the Prime Minister does something we disagree with, he should not be hung. He's not a traitor. He is democratically elected, and he's our Prime Minister. And I think we need to have that standard across the board. But I was very, I think, shocked when Michael Wernick, the Privy Council chair, suggested that there's going to be political assassination. To me, from an intelligence perspective, isn't that something you don't say publicly?
I mean, from my perspective, I can't comment on the overall views of the clerk, but what I can say is from a national security perspective, we do cover those sorts of threats. I would also just add for clarity that it's certainly not within our role to decide what is true and false or what type of discourse Canadians would find appropriate. We're really focused on the foreign intelligence and the national security elements of the issue.
Thank you. Because, again, under the guidance to officials giving testimony from the Privy Council, officials must understand and respect their obligation not to disclose classified information or other confidences of government to those not authorized to receive them. So I am concerned about someone actually voicing potential assassination. To me, that is that opens doors that should be closed. And so I would suggest, from an intelligence perspective, you bring that back, because I think we have to be very careful about this conversation. So I guess my frustration here is that we've seen the ability of third-party actors, not foreign threats, but third-party actors within Canada, to upend elections by having really good data sets, we've talked about deep fakes, by the use of false information. And that ability to respond to those operators is going to need really nimble responses. But it seems to me that you're much more in terms of sort of a military focus, a militarized focus, whereas we're dealing with, literally digital gangsters. And so what is the reassurance, based on the work that we've done from our committee, that the work that we've done, the concerns that we've raised are actually being heard and can be addressed in a nimble, quick manner, rather than have this election upended?
So perhaps I could talk about it a bit from the critical election incident public protocol perspective. And just to say that what determines whether the threshold is reached and whether Canadians are informed of something is, the expectation is that it's more likely, and I think this is fair to say from the intelligence perspective, that it's more likely to come from a foreign source. That has been the pattern when we look at France, when we look at the US, when we look at the UK, that the pattern has been one of foreign actors intervening. But the protocol is not limited to just foreign interference. The key component is an impact that affects the conduct of a free and fair election. And if you are correct, and there is something happening on the domestic side of such a magnitude that it impacts the conduct of a free and fair election, then it gets captured by the threshold.
Well, I guess I'm a little surprised that you think that the threat is foreign, when what we've seen is time and time again, and with the 17 countries we dealt with, the domestic threat, Myanmar. The genocide in Myanmar, where Facebook was warned again and again and again about the extremist language against the Rohingya Muslims, did nothing about it, ignored it, has been condemned internationally, still has not really taken steps. Sri Lanka, we heard the same thing. Brazil, we had representatives from Brazil at the International Committee warning us. Nigeria. The ability to use those platforms to spread hate was not foreign, it was domestic. And in each case, Facebook failed to respond. So our question in the 2019 election is, we're gearing up to fight a Cold War when what we really need to be knowing is how do we deal with third-party actors who want to influence elections. 100 votes here, blaming people there, attacking immigrants over here, and doing it very effectively through the manipulation of the algorithms of the Facebook platform. That's the question that we want to be reassured on, and I'm not hearing that.
So I appreciate, and perhaps I wasn't very clear, it doesn't matter the source. If it impacts the conduct of a free and fair election, it's captured by the protocol.
Yeah, but you'd have to be really on that. And what I'm saying and what we've seen is this is done, one vote here, one ad there, one black ad here, one comment on a site there, but patterns start to emerge and they're coming from the same few players. So you'd need to have a real understanding of how those players operate.
I just want to reassure you on one point that it can be a single incident or the culmination of many incidents or the accumulation. I think that's getting at what you were.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Angus. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Picard.
Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. One aspect we haven't discussed yet is the pre-attack. Let me explain. One day we are overwhelmed by an industrial quantity of hate messages, and if we're effective, by the next day we can undo all that by putting out a positive message or raising awareness, but the damage is done because it's a free speech environment. It's all rather intangible, and there's social damage, if I can call it that. The problem is this: when a hacker attacks a system, algorithms can be attacked, management systems can be attacked, codes can be attacked. If the attack takes place, you detect the attack and you respond to it as quickly as possible, best case scenario on the same day. The data we have in our system have been compromised. The compromised nature of those data. Can they be uncompromised? If we see that there has been an impact on data and algorithms, and the system is compromised, that means there will be no legitimacy. The ongoing election will have no legitimacy. The election process will have no legitimacy. So, does compromising data and systems through an attack mean that the data remain compromised, or once corrective measures have been taken, can the data and the system again be trusted? Because if not, it would be legally impossible to recognize the election as a legitimate one. In the specific case where an individual finds that his or her account has been hacked and data has been shared, well, we have indications on what to do when we're hacked, and then we take down what's been put up. There are things we can do depending on the kind of attack. Speed is very important because there's a propagation effect, there's a ripple effect. So I don't think you can stop the ripple with what we have now. But that's an attack on someone's reputation. Somebody hacks my account, says things that are not right, and there's a reputation problem, but this is just words, verbiage. If somebody can hack into the election management system, gets into the system, a real hack, where you're getting right into the system and where you can get into the data, into the coding, into the algorithms, into the code, and you compromise that. Now, that would mean that the election of the that the legitimacy of the election would be compromised, even if we can block the hack. So, would the data be compromised to the point that the election would have to be declared void? The first answer I gave was hacking on social media. Your second question, if I understand correctly, pertains to hacking into an election management system. For several years now, we've been working with Elections Canada to put protections in place to avoid exactly that kind of event, and to detect people trying to penetrate the system as quickly as possible to prevent data from being compromised and to protect the code. And that would mean shutting the door they're coming into and then using saved copies to restore the data in its original form. So I applaud the partnership and work that's been done. I have tremendous confidence in our systems. So the corrected data is not compromised. Correct, it isn't. Foreign signals. Can foreign signal be converted into a local signal so that it's not detected by you? Yes, thank you for the question. I will answer in English.
It's can a foreign actor come into Canada and sort of masquerade as a Canadian? I mean, technology...
Signal. You're in int.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes, technology does allow foreign actors to masquerade as Canadian or otherwise. Our intention is to look at the foreign actor and to try and find out whether they are attempting to do that so that we can pass information on to, for example, the cyber centers so that they can put in defensive measures or share that information with others who may be the victim of their act.
Your duty is to look at foreign signal. Are you in... is it possible for you not only to stop the signal, but to return an attack to destroy the source?
Under our current mandate for CSC, our authorities are limited to intelligence collection. There are provisions in Bill C-59 that that Parliament is currently considering that would allow that the Senate is currently considering, and if that bill were passed, we may have more authorities in the future.
That's what we are waiting for.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Go for. We're at about 9 minutes left, so I think we're going to be down to about 3 minutes each. We'll go to, first of all, Ms. Kuzi for 3 minutes, and then Mr. Erskine-Smith for 3 minutes, and then we'll be close to done. So, Ms. Kuzi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given the concern that you've heard from this side of the table today in regards to the nonpartisanship, the independence of the 5 individuals who comprise the panel, which will decide the critical protocol incident trigger, I am asking, please, for the assurance from both Monsieur Boucher as well as Mr. Sutherland that you will do everything possible in your power as public servants to support the absolute disclosure of equal and shared information to all political parties, please.
So I just want to be precise. So if there was an event that passed the threshold, it is an obligation that the Prime Minister be informed, the leaders of the opposition parties be informed, and Elections Canada. So I can give you full assurance that that's what will take place. It'll be the same briefing to all actors. Nobody has it. The decision would have been made that the threshold had been passed. There's the Prime Minister, the leaders of the opposition party, and Elections Canada are not the deciders. The decision's been made, but they will be informed equally. So I can give that assurance.
Thank you, Mr. Sutherland. Monsieur Boucher, voulez-vous ajouter quelque chose?
Yeah, absolutely. There will be likely many more events that do not pass threshold. The practice of the Cyber Center has always been and will continue to be. We detect incidents or events of significance to inform those that are affected or potentially affected. Unlike the threshold conversation, ours there's always an unattributed conversation. It's about the manifestation and giving the tools to those that are or might be affected, the tools to defend themselves or remediate the problem. So in our conversation, we would not be specific about entity X is having this issue, we just say there's an entity in the process having an issue. You can detect if you're also having the issue with the following tips and indicators, and we provide assistance to help you resolve these issues. And that's what would happen in all circumstances below threshold.
Thank you. And very briefly, Mr. Rogers, Anita, you might be tired of me talking about this, but I'm a member of the Trilateral Commission, and we were fortunate to go to Silicon Valley in November to have an overview as to a cybersecurity update with some of the most brilliant minds in the world. And I kind of felt that we perhaps, instead of being at Facebook and Google, we should have been at the main office of Fortnite. So I just wanted very briefly to hear your comments in terms of how you find, engage, and employ the absolute best to secure our electoral systems.
That's a great question. Thank you. We are recruiting, so anyone who's listening is welcome to send through a resume.
Ethics rules. I'll come after you.
But it is an excellent point because it is challenging to find the best and the brightest to come and work on our team. It is something we take pride in doing, and we make extensive use of student programs and other outreach across the country to reach into universities to bring in, I think, what we would consider truly exceptional people to work on these problems.
Thank you, Ms. Guzzi. Last up, Mr. Erskine-Smith for 3 minutes.
Thanks very much. I've got one question, and then I'll pass it to Anita. And my question is, when a number of us were in Washington and we were speaking to members of Congress on this issue, one of the members indicated that in their world, they do sort of a red team, blue team approach where their accounts are hacked, and whether it's their political staffers or it's Congress people themselves who are attempted hacks, and then they're told this is how you were hacked and this is how to prevent them in future. So are there any plans to hack us for the betterment of our democracy?
I welcome the invitation. We do provide advice to political parties, as you heard, that campaign managers and others. One of those measures is simulation. A good example, we use phishing emails. To this day, phishing emails remain the most prevalent threat that comes to each and every one of our inboxes. A campaign to sense, to give people an awareness of what that looks like and how to react, and then the post.
Take it less seriously, but I would encourage you to communicate with your American counterparts, and I think it would be a worthwhile exercise here in Canada to implement a simulation like that on a regular basis. And with that,
yes, thank you. I want to go back to the critical election incident public protocol. Without that, what is the default? I mean, what is it right now? I mean, my understanding is that there would be absolutely no informing of political parties. Any one of those members of that panel could go to the press on their own without that process, or worse yet, there could be an incident and none of them make the public aware or make political parties aware. So, can you tell me, without this, what exists right now? What would be the default right now if we didn't have this in place?
It's a very interesting question. Thankfully, it's hypothetical. But in the absence of a protocol during the writ period, I think that government officials and indeed ministers and the Prime Minister would be put in an untenable position where they would have to weigh in and decide whether or not something passed the threshold. And so obviously you would be stuck in a partisan dilemma there.
You all, I just have one question. It refers to a trip that we made to Washington. Some of us did about a year and a half ago to talk about Equifax. And to me, it was still alarming to find out that we're not regulating our credit bureaus in our country. But that said, the reason why the Equifax breach was even discovered was that there was an overarching group called the Homeland Security that was they had actually warned Equifax that there was a potential breach, warned several times, which they did not respond, did not fix it, and that's what caused the breach of 150 million Americans and about 19,000 Canadians, give or take, I guess. Do we have a similar system in Canada? And I would rather you not answer if we don't. You can tell me later. Do you have a similar process? Because what concerns me about this is a statement that Mr. Rogers said, that we have a mandate to investigate if they occur. So my concern is that does the fire have to be lit for you to extinguish it, or do you actually take steps to prevent the fire from occurring in the first place?
Let me
Mr.
just
Boucher.
correct one thing before I hand it on to Andre for a great answer. I mean, we investigate foreign actors and their intentions to discover them, not simply if they are brought to our attention. So apologies if I misspoke there. And I'll hand it over to Andre because one of the benefits of our system is that the intelligence capacity that we bring to bear in the foreign signals intelligence side can find the activities of cyber actors, which can be passed on to the Cyber Center to be able to provide that sort of insight and detection early on.
We have about 30 seconds or so.
That's a good warning if you know me in the microphone. The really good news that Mr. Rogers just talked about, the fact that we have one joint team is a strength in Canada, absolute strength. The equivalent of the Homeland Security or DHS in the US definitely exists in Canada. In fact, the Cyber Center is what in DHS you would find as the CISA. So they have a cyber equivalent cyber center. So you do have that in us, and our practice is very much similar to that. So hypothetical, Mr. Rogers and his teams detect something happening from foreign space to one of our constituents, informs my center. We would actually go out, reach over to them, and of course, for reputation reasons and other, other reasons, we'd start with a very discreet, we think you have this and you should do something about it. But if need be, and we need to escalate, we would take more public measures.
Okay, I'll finish with a last plug for what our committee is going to be doing on May 28th here in this very room is the International Grant Committee, meeting number 2. We met with 8 other countries, including Canada, in London to talk about these very issues, about foreign threats to our democracy, et cetera. We're going to be meeting in Canada this time for the second meeting. Similar invitation lists, inviting the platforms to appear. So any advice that you would have for the committee and witnesses to pursue, et cetera, would be appreciated. And that said, thank you for coming today to committee. Have a good afternoon, everybody.